Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get into some UFOs?
Always ready for a good UFO deep dive.
Okay, cool. So today we're going to be looking at the 1973 UFO wave. It's pretty intense. It was a very short period of time, late summer to early November of '73. And we've got some excerpts here from Kevin Randle's book, 1973, A Time of UFO Sightings, Landings, and Abductions. And this wave, it just seems like there was a really high concentration of sightings, ground sightings, interactions with alien creatures, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, it's one of those periods that really sticks out in UFO history. Just the sheer volume of reports in such a short time frame is pretty remarkable. Plus, you've got all these different types of encounter, not just lights in the sky, which is what people usually think of when they hear UFOs.
Right. Yeah, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. So looking through this book, what really stands out to you about this wave?
Well, I think what's really interesting is the contrast between the public's reaction and the official response. You had all these people reporting these incredible sightings and experiences, but the authorities, particularly the military, seemed very hesitant to engage with it.
Okay, so Randall actually talks about this in his book, right?
He does. He quotes an Air Force spokesman, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Davies, who basically said that the Air Force had dropped its UFO investigation program and that he doubted there would be any investigation into these new reports.
So basically they're saying, nothing to see here, move along while all this craziness is going on.
Exactly. It really highlights the skepticism and the reluctance of the authorities to really grapple with the UFO phenomenon.
I mean, that's kind of understandable, though, right? The Air Force probably has more important things to worry about than chasing down every UFO report.
I get that, but you can also see how it would fuel conspiracy theories. When the authorities are dismissive, people start to think they're hiding something.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've got this backdrop of official skepticism, but what about the actual sightings themselves? Where did this all start?
Well, Randall's book focuses primarily on the southeastern U.S., with Georgia being a particular hotspot. But there were reports coming in from all over the country, and even from other parts of the world.
And we're not just talking about lights in the sky here, right?
No, we're talking about a whole range of strange encounters. We've got everything from car engines stalling in the presence of UFOs to reports of small creatures in silver suits.
Wait, hold on. Small creatures in silver suits? That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme in UFO lore, and it pops up again and again in the reports from 1973.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the really bizarre stuff, let's go through some of these witness accounts that Randall highlights. He really paints a picture of just how widespread and strange these encounters were.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to emphasize that these accounts come from a variety of people. We're not just talking about UFO enthusiasts. We've got police officers, truck drivers, military personnel, everyday people from all walks of life.
And that's what makes it so compelling, right? It's not just one group of people with a shared belief system. It's coming from all over.
Right. So, for example, you have Walter Webb, a truck driver who was temporarily blinded by a bright flash from a UFO while he was driving. Then there's that incredible police chase in Louisiana where deputies chased 5 red-orange objects for 12 miles. The objects even seemed to approach the police car when they turned on their lights. I mean, can you imagine?
That is crazy. And then how about that news crew in Georgia who actually captured footage of a cigar-shaped object? It's described as having these distinct shadow patterns.
Right, and that footage really adds another layer of credibility to these reports. It's not just hearsay. There's actual visual evidence.
But you also have to be cautious with that kind of evidence, right? Photos and videos can be easily manipulated.
Absolutely. It's always important to scrutinize the evidence carefully. But even with that in mind, the sheer volume of reports and the consistency of some of the details is hard to ignore.
Right. It's like something was definitely going on, but what exactly that something was is still up for debate.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most intriguing and controversial cases from the 1973 wave, the Paul Brown incident.
Okay, yeah. This one I remember hearing about. Tell me more about that.
So Paul Brown is a shipyard worker from Mississippi. He claims that he encountered small creatures in a cone-shaped object that landed near his home. And get this, he actually fired his revolver at the departing UFO.
He shot at it. What, like out of fear, or was he trying to bring it down?
According to Brown, he was scared, and he reacted instinctively. Now, whether you believe his story or not, it highlights the fear and the sense of the unknown that surrounded these encounters.
Yeah, I mean, if you really believe you're facing something extraterrestrial, who knows how you'd react?
Exactly. And it's important to remember that we're dealing with human beings here, with all their complexities and their potential for misperception or even exaggeration.
Right, so not every witness account is going to be 100% accurate. But even with that in mind, the Paul Brown case, along with all these other reports, points to something unusual happening in 1973.
Absolutely. And it raises so many questions. What were these objects? Where did they come from? What were their intentions? These are questions that we're still grappling with today.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the more, shall we say, outlandish encounters, but what about the cases that seem more credible? The ones where there's no obvious explanation?
Well, there are quite a few of those. And one that really stands out is the case of a cab driver in New Orleans who claimed to have been abducted by creatures with crab-like claws.
Wait a minute, didn't you say earlier that there were reports of creatures with crab-like claws from other witnesses?
I did. And that's what makes this case so interesting, because it turned out to be a hoax.
Oh, wow. So he made the whole thing up.
He did. He later admitted that he had fabricated the story, possibly inspired by the other reports that were circulating at the time.
So it's like a case of life imitating art, imitating life.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of critical thinking when it comes to UFO reports. Just because a story is compelling doesn't mean it's true.
Right. It's a good reminder to be cautious. Okay, so we've got this mix of strange encounters, some more credible than others, and a backdrop of official skepticism. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. But I think it's important to approach these cases with both an open mind and a healthy dose of skepticism. We need to be willing to consider the possibility that something extraordinary is happening, but we also need to be rigorous in our analysis of the evidence.
And I think that's the perfect approach as we dive into what is perhaps the most famous case from the 1973 wave, the Pascagoula abduction.
Ah, yes. The case that really put alien abductions on the map. We're going to need a whole deep dive just for that one.
Okay, so stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back after a short break to delve into the Pascagoula abduction and all its strange and unsettling details.
Okay, so the Pascagoula abduction. This is a big one. Where do we even begin?
Well, we have to start with Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, two guys fishing on a pier in Pascagoula, Mississippi. It's October 11th, 1973, a seemingly ordinary evening that's about to take a very strange turn.
So set the scene for us. What happens next?
They're fishing, just enjoying the evening when they hear this buzzing sound and see a blue light. And then, out of nowhere, these three creatures appear.
Free creatures? What kind of creatures?
Well, that's where things get really weird. Hickson and Parker describe them as being about 5 feet tall, grayish-white, with no necks and these claw-like hands. It's like something out of a science fiction movie.
No necks and claw-like hands. That's terrifying.
It gets even weirder. According to their account, these creatures somehow flew them onto this brightly lit, oval-shaped craft.
They're taken aboard a UFO. And what happens inside? Well, their accounts differ slightly here, which adds another layer of complexity to the story cap. Hickson describes feeling weightless and seeing a machine that looked like a big eye. Parker, on the other hand, remembers seeing a blue box and a smaller, more feminine creature.
So two different perspectives on the same event. It makes you wonder how much of it is accurate, how much is influenced by their individual perceptions, or even by the stories they've heard about alien abductions.
Exactly. And we also have to factor in the psychological impact of such an experience. Trauma can distort memories, and it's possible that their recollections are influenced by the stress and fear they experienced.
Right, it's not like they had time to take notes or record the whole thing. So after this bizarre encounter inside the craft, what happens next?
Well, according to Hickson and Parker, they're eventually released and the craft just disappears. They're left on the pier, shaken and confused, trying to make sense of what just happened.
I bet. So what do? Who do they tell?
Initially, they're hesitant to go public. They're afraid of being ridiculed, of not being believed. But eventually, they decide to report the incident to the authorities.
And what's the reaction? Do the authorities take them seriously?
It's a mixed bag. Some people are skeptical, some are intrigued. The story quickly makes headlines, and soon Hickson and Parker are thrust into the spotlight.
It's like they become overnight celebrities, but not necessarily for the right reasons.
Right. They're subjected to intense scrutiny, interviews, even polygraph tests. And the debate rages on, are they telling the truth, or is this all just an elaborate hoax?
The Pascagoula abduction becomes this focal point for the whole UFO debate.
Wow.
And the mystery deepens when they're interviewed by Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
Hynek, a renowned astronomer and UFO researcher, is initially skeptical of their story. But after interviewing them, he's struck by their sincerity. He even says that he believes they had a real close encounter with something, though he's careful not to endorse the idea of alien abduction.
So even a skeptic like Hynek is convinced that something unusual happened that night.
Exactly. And that's what makes the Pascagoula abduction so compelling. Even after all these years, there's no easy explanation. It remains one of the most intriguing and debated UFO cases of all time.
A true UFO enigma, and it's just one piece of this larger puzzle that is the 1973 UFO wave. So let's zoom back out a bit. What other noteworthy incidents happened during this period?
Well, there's one that's particularly interesting because it involves a military helicopter, the Coin helicopter encounter. It happened in October of 73 in Ohio.
Okay, a military helicopter encounter. Tell me more.
So we have Captain Lawrence Coin and his crew. They're on a routine training flight in a Huey helicopter when they spot this bright red light approaching them.
And I'm guessing this isn't just another aircraft?
You guessed it.
Yeah.
As the light gets closer, they realize it's something much stranger. They describe it as a cigar-shaped craft with a red light in front and a white light at the rear. And just as it gets close enough to be a collision risk, their radios go dead.
Radio failure. That's
Yeah.
not good. So what happens next? Do they try to evade this thing?
Coin, being the skilled pilot he is, immediately takes evasive action. But the object, instead of moving away, hovers right above their helicopter.
Right above them. That's a pretty tense situation. What do they do?
Well, according to Coin and two of his crew members, a beam of green light suddenly shoots out from the bottom of this UFO. It bathes the entire cockpit in this eerie green light.
A green beam. Okay, now it's starting to sound like a scene from Close Encounters. Did everyone on board see this?
Actually, no. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Arrigo Jezzi, only reported seeing a white light. So right from the start, you have these conflicting witness statements, which has fueled debate about the case ever since.
Conflicting accounts, that's not unusual in UFO cases, but it does make it harder to determine what actually happened.
Right, and of course the skeptics had their own explanations. Philip Plass, who we mentioned earlier, suggested that the crew had misidentified a bright meteor fireball for a UFO, and that their evasive maneuvers were just instinctive reactions.
A meteor fireball? It's possible, I guess. But does that explain the radio failure and the green beam?
Not really. And it also doesn't account for the reports from ground witnesses, who also saw this object. So the Coin helicopter encounter remains one of the most intriguing and debated cases from that era.
It really makes you wonder what they encountered that night. Was it a misidentification, a secret military project, or something truly extraordinary we may never know for sure?
And that's the thing about UFOs, isn't it? They often leave us with more questions than answers.
Speaking of unanswered questions, we can't talk about this era without mentioning the Rendlesham Forest incident. It happened a few years later, in December 1980, but it's become almost legendary in UFO circles.
Ah, yes, Rendlesham Forest. Multiple witnesses, strange lights, a triangular-shaped craft, even recorded radiation readings. It's a classic.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the rundown.
So this all takes place at RAF Bentwaters, a U.S. Air Force base in England. It starts on December 26th, when two security police officers, Jim Peniston and John Burroughs, spot these unusual lights in Rendlesham Forest, just outside the base.
And being good security officers, they go to investigate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They think it might be a downed aircraft. But what they encounter is far stranger. They come face to face with this glowing object. Metallic, triangular in shape, either hovering or resting on legs. It has a pulsating red light on top and blue lights underneath.
That is strange. So what happens? Do they approach it?
They do. They get closer, and then suddenly the object moves through the trees and vanishes.
Just like that. It's gone. And this is just the first night, right?
Right. Later that night, and over the next couple of nights, more personnel, including the deputy base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, see these strange lights in the forest. They even take radiation readings near where the object was seen.
So we have multiple witnesses and physical evidence. What does the Air Force say about this?
Well, that's the interesting part. Halt actually documented the events in a memo that became known as the Halt Memo, but the official explanation from the Air Force is that there was no national security threat.
No national security threat, but they don't really offer a definitive explanation for what it was, do they?
Not really. Over the years, they've suggested things like a misidentified lighthouse or even glowing rabbit burrows.
Glowing rabbit burrows. Seriously, that's almost insulting.
I know, right? Needless to say, those explanations haven't satisfied the researchers who've investigated this case.
What about the witnesses themselves? Have they changed their stories over the years?
Surprisingly, no Peniston and Burroughs have stuck to their accounts, and in recent years, they've even revealed additional details. Peniston claims he actually touched the craft and received a binary code message from it.
A binary code message? That's incredible. So even after all these years, this case is still very much alive and unresolved.
Absolutely. And it highlights just how complex and multifaceted the UFO phenomenon is. It's not always about little green men and flying saucers. Sometimes it's about strange lights, unexplained events, and encounters that leave more questions than answers.
So, where do we go from here? We've explored this amazing wave of UFO activity from 1973, delved into fascinating cases like Pascagoula, Coin Helicopter, and Rendlesham Forest. It's clear that something unusual was happening. But what does it all mean?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's no easy answer. But I think what these cases show us is that our reality is far more complex and mysterious than we often give it credit for.
We tend to think we have it all figured out, but then something like this comes along and shakes up our whole worldview.
Exactly. And I think that's a good thing. It reminds us to stay curious, to question our assumptions, and to be open to the possibility that there's still so much out there that we don't understand.
And maybe, just maybe, some of those things we don't understand are out there looking back at us, watching us, studying us. Who knows?
It's a thought-provoking idea,
Hmm.
and one that has captivated humanity for centuries. The idea that we're not alone in the universe.
It's a theme that runs through so many cultures, so many stories, and maybe, just maybe, those stories are based on something real.
Or maybe they're a reflection of our own hopes and fears, our desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves, our fear of the unknown.
It's probably a bit of both, isn't it? The reality is we don't know, and that's okay. It's the mystery that keeps us searching, keeps us exploring, keeps us looking up at the stars and wondering.
Exactly. And as long as we keep that sense of wonder alive, who knows what we might discover? After all, the universe is a vast and mysterious place, and we're just beginning to scratch the surface.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground today, from strange lights and bizarre encounters to the possibility that we're not alone in the universe.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as we have.
I'm sure they have. And if you're intrigued by what you've heard today, I encourage you to do your own research, explore the source material, and draw your own conclusions.
Don't be afraid to question, to challenge, to think outside the box. The truth, whatever it may be, is out there waiting to be discovered.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll have those answers. But for now, we're left with the mystery. And that's not a bad place to be. After all, it's the mysteries that keep us going, keep us striving, keep us looking up at the stars with a sense of wonder and awe.
Well said. Until next time, keep looking up and keep an open mind.
So much to think about, it really is, like you said. We like to think we have a grasp on things, and then you go down the UFO rabbit hole.
It definitely makes you question everything you thought you knew.
Right. And we've been talking a lot about the potential dangers of UFO encounters. But what about the other side of the coin? The positive transformations that people report.
That's a great point to bring up because, yeah, it's easy to focus on the fear and the uncertainty. But there are so many accounts of people who've had these experiences and come away from them feeling profoundly changed in a good way.
Like their whole perspective on life has shifted.
Exactly. They report feeling more connected to something larger than themselves, a sense of awe and wonder at the vastness of the universe,
Yeah.
a deeper appreciation for life itself.
It's almost like they've been given a glimpse of something beyond our everyday reality.
You could say that. And that glimpse can be a powerful catalyst for growth and transformation. It can inspire creativity, compassion, a sense of purpose.
It's amazing to think that something so strange and unsettling could also have such a positive impact.
It is. It reminds us that the human experience is full of paradoxes, and that even in the face of the unknown, we have the capacity for growth and wonder.
So where do we go from here? We've explored this incredible wave of UFO activity from 1973. We've delved into some of the most compelling cases in UFO history. What's the next step for those of us who are captivated by this mystery?
I think the most important thing is to keep an open mind. Don't be afraid to question, to explore, to challenge the conventional wisdom. Let curiosity be your guide.
Curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Exactly, because that's how we get closer to the truth, whatever that truth may be.
And maybe, just maybe, the answers to these mysteries lie within ourselves, in our capacity for wonder, our willingness to embrace the unknown, and our courage to confront the possibility that we're not alone in the universe.
Beautiful. I like that.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of another deep dive. I hope you've enjoyed this journey into the strange and mysterious world of UFOs.
It's been a pleasure sharing these stories and exploring these mysteries with you.
As always, we encourage you to do your own research, draw your own conclusions, and keep looking up. You never know what you might see.